here this morning to share a little bit about what we found out. There are two pieces of paper. There's a slip inside the folder kind of itself. And the slip inside talks a little bit about dollars that we found specifically in studying areas for our park district. The folder is where we've taken all the formulas that have been proven that we've been able to use and now other park districts and organizations are using. So as Brett mentioned, he and I actually are co-leads on this project. So Brett got the joy of commissioning and working directly with the contractors on the two economic studies, and I've been working more on the outreach side as part of my role in working with a lot of community groups. One of the things is really, why did we do this? And you know, our park board and our staff, we recognize one thing here in Tacoma. We're very blessed in that we're the Metropolitan Park District of Tacoma. We are a separate entity. Most time park services are run by a city entity, which means every budget cycle they're fighting very aggressively and competitively with fire and social service and a lot of other things. Back in 1907, the citizens of Tacoma, right after being able to get Point Defiance Park, said, we know what we want here in this community and we know we need an entity that can be responsible for that. But as time has gone on, there is a lot of good things, accountabilities in government, a lot of opportunities to show outcomes, to show use of public resources. So we're right along board with that, but we've been challenged some to answer the question and compete on economic terms, when people are asking, how much is that going to cost us and how much are we going to get back out of it? So this was our opportunity to look at ways that we could quantify return. Knowing that everybody knows it's a good thing, but how do we get past those antidotes to be able to do something stronger and better? And to be able to align with the economic policies and decisions that are going on by the city and by the entities around us and those that we collaborate and work together with. The other thing is that we know that the community is better, is healthier, stronger, or we felt we knew that, but the thing is, how can you prove it? So prove it was kind of the bottom line, which is why we commissioned these. You know, one of the things is thinking about the assessment and how do you translate an experience into something of value. You know, people might see somebody on a playground, we see the historic structures we have in Wright Park. That was the challenge, is try to take those things and validate how much in economic terms it's worth to be able to have these resources in a community. So there were two parts of the research, and the first phase was really very traditional, and it looked at spending, the actual dollars. So part of it was primary research where the entity, in this case it was Heber, they went out and they did surveys in our parks that we'll talk about and found out where people came from, how much they spent coming and going, and looking at those patterns. But then we did some secondary research that went to property values, that also went to, with the resources we have that are given to us through tax and other venues, how do we use those to deliver a project? And how does the spending that we do continue to be a driver in the local economy? So that first one was what was called intercept surveys. Basically intercepting people who were out in the parks. There were 45 different visits that they went out to 16 parks. And the 16 parks were really chosen because they represent the classification that we have across the system. We have neighborhood parks that serve a 3/4 mile, and we try to cover the whole city that way. And then we have community parks that are about 1.5 miles that have much broader amenities in places like Wright Park and Wapato Park that we know are drawing people from further areas. And they looked at the people they met in the park, so it's just a window slide shot, and used this as a representative sample of who was visiting our parks and what their spending habits were. Some of what we found out, we really normalized a little bit. When we asked about spending at the park, it didn't include any admissions. There's very few places, but they were in Point Defiance and where there's the zoo and those type of amenities where people would have paid. But they really, when they looked at spending, took off anything that was related to admission because it's such a rare circumstance in our parks. But they did ask them, coming and going, did you stop? Was this part of another trip? Did you spend money, part of your day coming into the park, especially if they were from the county? How did they impact spending inside the city? And then we're able to use this sample to basically multiply out for the frequency of visits, the size of the group, and the spending that each one had. What we found is that the residents were spending about $4 million related to going into our regional parks and attractions, as well as local community parks. So if you take People's Park, there's Johnson's Candy right there, there's a couple of venues right around, and a lot of people really, when they were asked, what did you spend at the park, they're thinking about visiting, especially in those urban locations, the businesses that are around there. And then you see the non-residents, because to them it's more of a trip. They're coming in, they're visiting the park, they're doing some other business, they're spending the day, they're stopping at the store, they're picking up food for their picnic lunches, that they are spending money, again, going into our regional facilities and attractions, but also in our community and local parks. And I think that was a little bit more surprising to us, that there's really the same visitor ratio, how many people we find from Fife and out in Pierce County that are at Neighbors Park when we go out and talk with them, and we have our maintenance staff interact and find out who's visiting the park for the day. So those two really was how much is spent being brought in, and we really focused around a catalyst for economic driver in the city of Tacoma. The other research was based on looking at methodologies that came out of Texas A&M, a very prominent professor down there that has looked at the value of parks, the value of having properties on golf courses, that type of thing, and is able to look at isolating out only like properties, taking out the commercial properties, looking at home values, but looking at what he calls the zones of influence. That from a smaller park, there's a smaller zone of influence out about 3 blocks where there's an impact on property values. Going out to larger parks, community parks that can go out to 5 blocks, and being able to recognize where there is some deviation, some increase, and assess property values because of an amenity like a park that all those houses surround and are able to access. And applying that across, again, our sampling, doing those property values for representative parks in each of the different areas of the city. So not every area has the same property values, but there is still an increase to those property values and relative to the park and public amenities that are there. And based on that, found that there's just about a little under 10 million that is generated to the city and in property taxes related to having park amenities and the places that people live where we have those available to the community. And this has been important. The City Council has heard some of this and really thinking about, because there's always been this driver to build things. And the more you build things, if you're in a state when you need to generate property values, and I think has had them relook a little bit about what is done with open space and what is done with the properties that already exist. The other part, as I mentioned, this Implants is a modeling software, so it's a method that has been tried and true and validated as ways to look at and to be able to measure the direct impacts, indirect and induced impacts of spending by the park district. Direct, of course, is that we're spending the money that we have directly on the operations and what needs to be accomplished to keep the system going that the public has entrusted to us. Indirect is there's going to be subsequent purchases. The industries that we support that have a large market in serving the park district, when you think about the what we need in order to maintain the open space that we have, the parks that we have, the suppliers that are benefiting from being able to supply our greenhouses, supply our golf course and the different facilities that we offer. And the induced goes that one step further because we are an employer. We have a lot of times these dollars that people are entrusting as taxes, we're putting back into the local economy because we spend a lot of it locally, but then the employees and those who are working for us seasonally or throughout the year are also spending. And they use that by looking at each of our 2009 general fund, each of the enterprise accounts, our expenditures, where we were spending those dollars, and we're able to represent a net economic impact of just under 15 million of that spending generating out in the community. So I said this first phase, we just called first phase because we did it first, and we looked at very traditional models that we knew were out there, and we really focused on just the 3 that we knew were tried and true methodologies, and found that there's just this 46, almost $47 million in a year generated through traditional economic values going on in our system. After that, we commissioned the second report to be less traditional, to really start to get in those benefits we know come from a park system. There's an educational value, a health value, an ecosystem value, and how do we find out or represent how valuable it is to have this green space and places where people can walk and run and hike and just sit and be quiet for periods of time. And so we commissioned Earth Economics, who is a local agency, it's a nonprofit that does research, that has been able to do something distinct in that they had done a lot of research on different individual values, but applied all of it to our entire system to give us a system value. Really one of the first times that's been done. What they had come up with, an ecosystem infrastructure. There's different land types, whether it's a rainforest, whether it's a beach, whether it's a wetland, and from that, those different types of land types produce different functions. They purify drinking water, they purify the air, having forests and what the trees do. So being able to quantify the land types, categorize all of our park system by these land types, and be able to look at the goods and services that either they directly produce or they offset, because if you didn't have any trees, you would have to continue to provide more ways, man-made ways, to try to purify the air, man-made ways to filter water, and so to be able to avoid taking on those costs. And looking at the climate benefits, food provision, everything that our system offers across all of our acreage, they have, actually there's several different, it's not that every acre equals the same, but the end result is that there's a current value of minimally about $9 million. They also look for us to restore value, knowing that there's some of our spaces that are open spaces that haven't been maintained, that we didn't have maintenance management plans, or we inherited and haven't completely taken advantage of. So we now have resources looking at how to maintain those spaces and get their ultimate ecosystem value back for the community. With the healthy urban living, we know that there's certain aspects that we can just believe to be kind of true. They found just a few areas where we could really tie things directly back. And again, we only encourage them to put in this report those things that were really scientifically valuable, reliable things that we knew that we could report out and stand on. So there were two aspects of health that they brought in. The one absolutely is air purification. As a park district, we maintain about 20% of the canopy across the city. And the air purification, if you're following some of the conversations in South Tacoma and South Pierce County, there's a lot of indications that there needs to be improvements in air quality. But the areas where there's a nice tree canopy in order to absorb some of the issues and pollutants coming off the freeway, there's a greater value for the community. And so the ability to take those toxins out of the air, the systems that it takes to take away what one tree takes away, that's what this value really represents. $300,000 in a year just having trees take care of our air for us. Exercise is interesting because we all know we need to do it. We all know there's a value there, but how do you translate that value to decrease medical expenses, fewer days off? We actually know that there's a ton of people of all ages in our parks, but there's no economic data around youth because there's not necessarily a savings to keeping them in school each day that anybody has tracked, but we know that's the case with work. The studies they were able to found really validated there's obviously a very strong correlation between people who meet the health standard of exercise 3 to 5 times a week for the right duration with lower costs in their medical care, with less days of absence. So that has been established for a long time. What they were able to track were studies that put together the availability of park amenities and show that those communities and those places where people had good outdoor contact, good outdoor amenities to be able to go to exercise, trails to walk, to run, to bike, that they met that standard much more. So they were able to apply that to our community and look at what our system offered and show that people are meeting this standard or have the ability to meet this standard so much more in our community because of the park resources here. Social capital, there were 2 dimensions that they were able to look at. One obviously is volunteerism and the engagement. And the number up here actually just represents what people put into our ecosystems throughout the year. At the time of the report, 2009, there were 52,000 hours just in the restoration that our park system benefited from. Across the district, we actually had 150,000 hours, and now we're closer to 180,000 hours between youth sports coaches and Fort Nisqually reenactors across the whole district. But again, a third of our volunteerism often is focused just on helping to maintain those green systems and improve the ecosystem value that we all benefit from. The other part is that people are very engaged. They love the public amenities that the park system provides. We had finished Wright Park and the Lizina Linnet project at McCarver, and the fact that a lot of corporations, a lot of foundations have rallied around the public engagement and the public opportunity to put resources into public projects. And so the social value of the donations and resources that really we leverage for the benefit of the community is what's captured in this number. A few years ago, 2005, there was an $84 million bond. Since that time, we're closer to $40 million additional dollars that we've been able to leverage through state grants, through private giving, in order to deliver, $120 million worth of public improvements, improvements to our public park system. Education, it costs basically $4.50 to educate a student in the public education system. We find that people are regularly using our resources, whether it's the Conservatory, Fort Nisqually, Zoo and Northwest Trek for educational opportunities. And this really just captured those official tours scheduled throughout a year. We know that there's a lot of field trips, there's a lot of informal education that happens between parents and children in schools that come out during the day and utilize our resources to learn and understand whether it's the environment or the culture and heritage of our community on a regular basis. So we combine those two phases and come to $73.8 million in overall resources. So to look at $74 million as far as benefits and economic impacts in the community, we know that really is just touching the surface. We only looked at 10 of the 23 ecosystems that Earth Economic listed, only one dimension of health, and just that sample of formal education opportunities. So we know that the number itself is not a holistic number. It could be debated in many ways, but we're really sure, and people have told us that it starts to understand that there's a value well beyond maybe what we've been able to talk about or put into any dollar and cents terms in the past. So here's just some of the other areas we know that we still have an opportunity to look into. There's so many more dimensions of health. The quiet place, really more and more prescription of quiet time is important to maintain health, has been linked to lowering rates of ADD and ADHD, at least the symptoms coming out, and being able to provide outdoor spaces, mental health and stress relief, the historic and cultural assets that we maintain, and the interpretation of that, just community safety as you bring community together and working together and familiar with each other, and then just the value of play and families spending time together. These things are, as of yet, just unvalued. There's no dollar terms that we can present or attach to each of those things at this time. In perspective, again, most of this data comes from 2009. Our overall operating revenue, what we had to work with, was $38 million. Tax funding was 45% of that in the general fund. So you look at this and we start to see that we're doing our best as we can to definitely return on that investment of the public tax dollars that are entrusted to us. Okay. Some of the things that we've been just asking ourselves, and as we go out sharing, is how do we use this information more to be able to have a healthy community and keep the vitality of this community going? How can we continue to talk about those other areas and translate them into economic terms just so we can make balanced decisions? So we're able to be at the table when important conversations, funding conversations, granting conversations are made, to be able to look at whether a golf course transitions back to housing or whether some form of open space is able to be sustained, and to collaborate much broader with other organizations and entities that can help us either protect the assets, but also to understand and educate one another. Here's just a few of the things that our board has challenged us to do and where we're taking action with the information that we've obtained. There's definitely a greater emphasis on our natural area restoration. Our Parks Department is Parks and Natural Resources Division now, and we have staff who are professionally assigned to those open spaces, and they work with that 50,000, 55,000 hours of park steward hours in order to maintain and improve the ecosystem that we have. We are looking at the stormwater benefits and flood management value of our system. Kind of an interesting aha is how much on a lot of our projects, and so you kind of ask the questions about how that makes sense when we're actually maintaining the asset that provides those services naturally. Linking more directly with the schools and groups to expand educational opportunities. You may or may not know that SAMI, the Science and Math Institute of the Tacoma Public Schools, is located on Point Defiance Park property, and the students there, 10th through 12th grade, have an integrated curriculum for all their science and math. They visit the zoo, they do shoreline water assessments, they do all their science based directly in our facilities down there. And just bringing this benefits methodologies into our capital design as well. When we're thinking about, it's always complex, we do a lot of time with the public, how are we going to design this park, but looking at the ecosystem benefits that we can do. We have a major Point Defiance project. I think you guys have heard some about that. One of the big things is how can we, if we're going to need to build or improve some parking, making sure that there's a drainage system under it and using some new technologies and things that are environmentally sound and enhance the ecosystem at the same time. And bringing the information to the table when those critical decisions are being made. And just continuing to educate at all levels. This information, and actually this one that you have here, came about because the statewide agencies and association that works in Park and Recreation said, we need what's in your report, but I need it in something that's simple that I can take to Olympia, that will go to Capitol Hill, that will be part of the National Association presentations that are coming up throughout the year. And so just sustaining, our board in particular has seen how incredibly valuable our volunteer service, our social capital, the engagement of staying connected with the community and working collaboratively on every project. So this is just where we're going. We know that other folks have other ideas, have other pieces of the conversation that we're more than happy to talk with you about if any ideas come up. Again, both Brett and I are our points of contact, and we're both pretty easy to find, probably Brett more so every week here with you.
About questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know Point Defiance is a real gem, and but I don't know that it's particularly well known outside the Tacoma area. It seems to me it's almost like if you're going to the Seattle area, it's one of the things that's kind of a must-see when you visit the Seattle area. Is there a way that we can promote that more effectively than we do now? And I guess the second question is, it seems like a very large park for being a metropolitan park. Do you know where it ranks in size versus other metropolitan parks within the United States?
I'm going to help you on the second. For one, so interesting what we found through this process, actually, is we believe it's the most visited thing in Portland County. And in talking to people on site, you would be surprised how many even international visitors are there. There's groups of people who run there every day, and that was probably about a third. Then there has, just last summer, I spent the whole summer out there. Folks know about that park, and they are coming from across the state, the whole Northwest region. And again, it just ties in. If they're coming this way for any reason, when people have out-of-town guests, it's a huge place where they automatically take them. So we definitely found that at least, again, 66%, of 2/3 of who are in the park at any one time tend not to be residents of the city, or even necessarily when it comes to Point Defiance of the county itself. So yes, definitely we're always knowing that, and it's kind of an interesting balance. More marketing could be done to make sure people know about it, but then you have the residents of Tacoma saying, you know, don't over advertise because I don't want people in my park, because they're there walking every day. So we have to, we definitely are in this balance between it being somebody's neighborhood park and it being this major attraction as far as size comparison.
Just to add to that, that's one of the reasons for that first study that we did, was to find out how much of an economic driver it really is, so that then we can work with the city and the Economic Development Department to really work on maybe doing a little better job of promoting it, because it is an economic driver for Tacoma. But as Roxanne said, it is a balance. In terms of your second question, Dan, the size, it's actually Point Defiance Park is the second largest park in the United States that's within city boundaries. The first is Central Park.